Danielle Baird, and I'm here with my colleague Heather Doyle Frazier, and we are the co-creators of the Writers Workshop. And today, in this part of our webinar series, we are going to be talking about the importance of community. And a big piece of this program that we've created is community. It's a gathering of 6 to 8 writers who are all working together on their book. And, we've gotten a lot of questions about like, well, why would I want to do this in a group setting versus just working with you one-on-one? And so today we're going to talk a little bit about all those different benefits that you get by being part of a community of other writers. So hi, Heather.
Hi, I'm excited to talk about this today. I think that when people think about writing a book, they only think about, obviously, the act of writing by themselves in a room, just, me and the computer or me and whatever is your, best way to get that information out. And so it might seem counterintuitive to think about having a community. But while that first part of the process is about you getting your ideas on the paper, it's more than that. So it can be really isolating when you're by yourself and you're sort of in this vacuum and you're writing. And some days are harder than others. Some days are easier than others. Some days you feel super creative. Other days you don't feel like it at all. And so there's a number of things that the community of writers you surround yourself with can help you with. And one of them would be support, just having that support. That's kind of the most obvious, first thing. I have other people around me who understand what I'm going through, who are experiencing the same ups and downs, and having that ebb and flow with their creativity and with their writing, and knowing that you are not alone is super helpful.
I think I was on mute. Can you hear me?
You were on mute.
Okay. So I keep thinking about how writing a book is really similar to running a marathon. And even though I'm not much of a runner myself, but I think that when a lot of people undergo these bigger like physical challenges, they join a runner's group, they join CrossFit, they join some type of a community to help them train and work together. Like you were saying, on those days like where you have your highs and your lows, you're celebrating that you had a great session, or maybe you're struggling through something. Like sometimes when you're on these long journeys of creating something, knowing that there's other people who are right down in their own trench doing that hard work can give you the motivation and the support to keep going and to stick with it. So like I totally agree that like it's early on in the process, even when you are working solo, knowing that there's other people doing that work too, I think is really, really helpful.
And I think when it's not just that knowing that they're there with you, they can even, when you're feeling that in that low space, they can even say, you know what, I was there yesterday. It's going to be okay. Just keep going. Your task is to just write. So just write. And remembering, oh yeah, 3 days ago, I was in that up place too. So even if it doesn't feel easy right now, doesn't mean the whole thing is going to be like this. And I think, and it's not just the accountability, it kind of gives you a window too into other people's process. So, if Julie is in your writers group and you're having trouble today, and then Julie says, you know what, I was having a really difficult time the other day, and I went out for a walk, and it made all the difference. maybe you should give it a shot. Maybe you should give it a try. And so just having other people around to say, you don't have to follow what I did, but this worked for me. Maybe it'll work for you.
Yeah, it could give that spark of an idea of, one more thing to try and experiment with. Because, I think, as creative people, sometimes, you can get into that some habits and patterns which can really serve you. We've talked about this before about waking up early and setting your space and having your ritual. But I know that like sometimes you may need to shake it up a little bit, and you can get some of those ideas from other writers, from within your community.
Another thing that we talked about before was kind of when you're in that kind of murky middle place sometimes, and it's really hard to see out of that, and having people around you who have been around for your part of this journey too. They have seen you when you are at your high place, and they can remind, and inevitably every single writer goes through a place where they're thinking, why am I writing this book? I don't even remember now why I'm writing this book. And there's lots of things that we do with our authors to help them remember those things. But when you're in a writing group, they can help you remember too. They can say, you know what? I know why you're writing this book. You told me why you're writing this book. You're writing it because you want your message out there. You're writing it because you have something really unique and special to say that only you can say. And sometimes we really need those messages given to us at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think, we've also just talked about the way that we supported each other as we were writing, our respective books. And I know that even though like it may seem a little bit cheesy, or you may not think that you need it, like sometimes having those other cheerleaders kind of in your life to root you on, and like you said, to remind you about why you're doing this and tell you that you can do it, helps you remember on like the days that your critic might be extra loud. And so I know we've spent a lot of time talking about kind of while you're in the first draft process, how working and being in part of a community can be really helpful. But what about when maybe you have a first draft of a part of your book or your whole book, and you're starting to look for feedback? Can't I just have my husband read it, or my friend, or post it on Facebook and get some feedback that way? Like, why do I need why would I want a group?
Well, you're hitting on something really important, and it's not just those, when you talked about having the cheerleader people there to help you, it's not just that they're cheerleaders, it's that they're writers who are cheering you on. So they know exactly where you are. They have those very same issues going on. They're doing the same things. So their cheering is a little louder for you when you're a writer, because well, they get it. They're not just like you said, my husband or whatever. That goes the same for when you're looking for feedback. You don't want to just pick anybody up off the street and say like, hey, I want you to read my book, tell me what you think, and then take their feedback and do what they say. That's just not going to work, because your book isn't written for every single person out there. So having a discerning reader, and writers are oftentimes the most discerning readers because they do a lot of not only writing, but also reading. And having that discerning reader to help you, and knowing that they know where your tender heart might be at that moment too. It's different than when someone who hasn't been through the process just says, I would chuck the whole thing. This is crap. That's most likely not going to happen from another writer, especially one that we're bringing together in our group. But specific and intentional about the people that you're wanting feedback from, because that makes a big difference. Like you said, posting something on Facebook you know, a lot of people have 500 friends or however many friends, and not every single one of those people are going to be a good fit to give you feedback on your book.
Yeah, I think you touched on something really important. Like when you're asking for feedback or you're having someone, read the book or read your piece, you touched on the importance of who this piece of writing is for. And I think that, just kind of your average reader may not understand how to filter your writing and think about it for someone who may not be them. So, and I think that, like you said, writers are a little bit more nuanced in understanding some of those distinctions. But, if you give it to your mom, but she's not your ideal reader, like she probably will read it anyway because she's your mom. But, she may not understand that, well, this book is really written for, say, design professionals who have a certain level of shared understanding, and you may not need to explain everything to the nth degree, and she might not get that because she doesn't have that baseline vocabulary. And so if she's like, well, I don't get it, that can feel crushing, but it doesn't mean that your book is bad or what you've written is confusing or off base. Like it might not be for her.
Well, and I think too, so a fellow writer might say something, if they don't have that vocabulary, they might say something like, I'm not sure if let me ask you a question first. Is your audience, the person that is your ideal reader, your demographic, will they have the background knowledge to understand, these concepts? And maybe you hadn't thought about that, and maybe the answer, like for most of it, is yes, but ooh, you know what, I'm going into this more advanced place over here. They probably don't in this area. So up to this point, I'm good. But then when I verge over here, I forgot that my reader, she has everything up to like chapter 7. But then beyond that, this is new territory it's kind of, cutting edge stuff that I want to deliver. So I do need to spend a little more time here. But someone like an editor or another writer or, who is familiar with that idea, because that's what they're doing too. They will know to say, ask that question. And that's not saying you're doing it wrong. That's just saying, I need to know more because I don't have that vocabulary, but that doesn't mean your reader doesn't. I want to know where that line is so that I can help you to, do better with your book.
Yeah, and I think again that's another like little nuance that I want to call out, and and this has been my experience in working with you too, that like I think a great editor, and when you're getting great feedback, a lot of times it's in the form of questions. They're not coming in and telling you exactly what you need to do and line editing to the nth degree on some of these early drafts. It's just kind of like shining a light on different things and asking questions and then handing it back to you to trust that you as the author of this book are going to know the answers to those questions. And I've seen that in all different kinds of critiques. My background is coming from art. But I always think like the most effective critiques are like, well, what were you trying to say here? What were you trying to, like, what was your goal with this piece? Or, this feels a little bit confusing to me. Can you tell me a little bit more? Versus being like, well, I would write it this way, or I would make it blue.
And I think with that, that would be that person's work, not your work. So, it doesn't matter what they would do, but asking those questions, what were you trying to do? What were you trying to say? I'm a little unclear here. I've worked with so many people when I've asked those questions and I say, I really would like you to tell me more about this. What do you want the reader to know? And then they say something so eloquent and just so perfectly spot on. And I can't tell you how many times that I've said, that's what you should write right now. Like, stop, write that right now. That's it. That's what it is. But it took just that little push of that little question.
We've done that just, I mean, in working on like the marketing copy for a webinar here. Like we're like trying to write those bullet points and just like, and then we'll get on the phone and I'm like, what I'm trying to say is da 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 da. And you're like, okay, great. Like, get typing. And, you know, I think again, like that's the power of this community and having space to be able to have dialogue about your book, because sometimes I think you have to sometimes say it out loud to process it, to be able to write it. And that's totally okay.
Well, and it's sort of like what you've written is that first draft, and then you're not able to get beyond the writing part of that first draft for some reason. Sometimes there's just a little block there. But then changing it up by speaking it versus writing it gives you some like out of the box flexibility that you didn't have before for some unknown reason. And so mixing those ways of communicating up can be really helpful. But you're not going to have that if you're by yourself. It's pretty rare that someone walks around and says, what was I trying to say here? Because they know, I mean, they know that in their head and they don't realize that there's a discrepancy. They're not walking around with a microphone, you know, like a recording saying, what I really want to say in this area is, you know, so having that person or a group of people around you to help you do that is super helpful. You're muted again, Danielle.
Well, what I said wasn't very funny anyway, so it was a silly joke. So like, yeah, I think it's just that idea of, you know, mixing it up. And we've talked about it, I think, in an earlier webinar, like, you know, if you're having writer's block, like to shift things up and, you know, I think this is a great place, like you said, you know, in terms of editing, when you've gotten something down and you need to shake things up a little bit, like just to switch up your medium and to try and talk it out with someone, you know, I think like we had talked about, you know, preferably another writer or someone who kind of has that discerning ear. And you know, maybe you can help kind of set the tone when you're asking for feedback. And so by that, I mean, like, if for whatever reason you're not able to find another writer to work with, or you're not able to be part of our group, or, you know, to do something like that, I think I've found that sometimes by being really clear and specific in asking for the feedback and what type of feedback you're looking for, you can sort of train the ear of the person that you're partnering with. So yeah, like, so maybe you, and sometimes I think you can just need that sounding board. So it's like, I just need you to listen. Like, you don't even need to say anything, but just talking it out. Or like, you know, we said, like, maybe they're only allowed to ask questions. They're not allowed to tell you anything. That probably would be my first idea on how to maybe train a listener if you really can't find someone.
And that is going to be hard for people because people, if they think you have a problem, they want to help you fix it. And the way that they know how to fix it is not by asking you a question usually, but by actually telling you how to fix it. But they don't have your voice. They don't know where your story, even if it's nonfiction, your book, but I mean like the story of your book is going.
That's true. And I know the other place that sometimes I've come up against, you know, with people who aren't experienced in giving critique is it could just be, oh, I like it. Well, why? Oh, I don't know. It's great. Or on the other end, like, it was okay. Or I didn't like it. It can take some practice And again, like in going to art school, we had like entire semesters where this is what I had to do every day. And we had a professor who really pushed us to be able to articulate the specifics about what's working, what's not working, and why I feel that way. And delivering that feedback in a way that is kind and helpful. Because me just being like, so Heather, I love your book. Like, it might kind of feel good, but other than that, like, that's not helpful.
Right. And I think, because people aren't used to doing that, if you start like if you're kind of trying to help the conversation move, you can say, well, what did you think of this part? How did you feel when you were reading this section over here? That, especially if there's an area where you're feeling as the writer a little bit like, it's almost there, but I'm not feeling it totally. I mean, that's where I would go in and ask that specific question. Well, how did you feel when you were reading this? Or did you understand what I was saying here? What did you take from that? And usually what I've found is when you ask people specific questions, then they start kind of unpacking what, oh, I love the book really means to them, and all those specific things that they liked. And then they might find some things like, yeah, well, I was a little bit confused there, but overall your general message still, resonated with me, or whatever it was. But kind of asking some specific questions requires them to give you specific feedback, and then they start looking a little more deeply and are able to kind of give you that feedback that you're looking for.
That's such a great point. And just like in how we can, like, maybe you can't control, their reaction or what they're going to say, but you can kind of take like ownership and leadership in guiding the discussion. And I think, like you said, vague questions beget vague answers. So if it's just like, well, what do you think of the book? That's huge. That's a really big question, and it's really general. And so like you're going to get a general reply like, oh, I liked it, I didn't like it. But if you're like, okay, like in chapter 2, when I'm talking about this concept, was it clear to you, why or why not? Or, if no, then can you tell me a little bit, like, where did I lose you? Like now, again, as the respondent, I can dig in and like focus on what I'm, giving back. And, the other thing that I would say too, and this is tricky, is when you're in a place where you're going to start to ask for feedback, you're probably going to go to people that you trust and that you care about and that care about you. And they are going to be worried about hurting your feelings. And so this is where it can get really tricky in getting that critical feedback that's going to make your writing better. And so sometimes you have to give them permission and kind of set the stage, like, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I really want to know, like, if there's something that isn't working, like, it's going to help me. And so, kind of framing it and telling them that it's okay to be critical. Oh, you're muted, Heather.
I think that also recognizing for yourself, and I mean, saying this to someone else is helpful when you're reminding yourself this too. This is my book, but it's not me. There's a lot of me in this book, but when you say this part isn't working for me, you're not saying you're not working for me. You're just saying, I don't understand this part right here. It's not something that you need to get defensive about. It's not an attack on you personally. You're specifically asking about the writing, and there might be parts of the writing that need to be reworked, and that's why you're asking them. So remembering, my writing, although it is an extension of me and there's a lot of me in it, it is not me. And when someone gives me feedback on my writing, they're not talking about me, they're talking about my writing. And that's hard sometimes to remember too. I also think, when we think of the word critical, like critical feedback, I think that conjures up in people's minds that it's going to be bad. It's not necessarily bad. It's wanting to receive feedback that's going to make your book better. And so it doesn't mean that they're going to say bad things about your book. It just means they're going to give you details to help you craft and develop the best book that you can create. So that's a difference.
That's such a great point. And like critical feedback, like you said, it's detailed, it's specific, and it could be highlighting a strength, but it's
Yeah.
getting specific and being like, the way that you told this anecdote, like, brought me to tears or made me laugh so hard I spit out my coffee. And that's critical feedback. And so now like, okay, like, I didn't know that part was so good. Maybe I can do more of that over here. And so, yeah, that's such a great catch, Heather.
Well, and I think that sometimes, especially if you're working with someone who isn't that experienced in giving this type of feedback, you might even want to not use the word critical because they might not kind of be familiar with that. You may want to say, I really am looking for some helpful feedback. I'm really looking for something to, some feedback that will help me make my book better. So you're kind of, with the words you're using, you're training them to look for, yes, not only the parts where I need some additional help, like because it's not working, but also the parts that are really working. I want to know those too. So like you said, I can add more in there if there's not enough. If you only have one story in there, but you actually are a phenomenal storyteller, then you need to have more. You can't just have that one. And so knowing, oh my gosh, that story was just, it just moved me so much. Can you have more of that in here?
Yeah, I think that is such a great tip. And I totally I think slipped into some jargon with saying critical feedback, like without realizing it. And you're right, like it's kind of a shared language for us because of the work that we do. But yeah, to someone who doesn't give feedback on a daily basis, I think it would be so easy just to be like, okay, well, here's a list of the 25 things I don't like about your book.
Right.
And, even as someone who has been, doing client work for decades and getting this kind of feedback on my work, like I've gotten a lot better about being able to breathe and hear the feedback and not take it so personally. But it's still an ongoing practice. And so,
For everybody, I think. Yeah. I mean, because it's not what you're used to.
yeah. And so, like, I just also want to just remind you to be gentle with yourself when you're getting that feedback. And so, and to try to resist the urge to get defensive. Yeah. So it's just like, all right. Because, and this is really hard, but just to take that, if someone's like, oh, I don't like this, and your head's like, what? Just to take that deep breath and try to listen. Because sometimes what I've found is you might be like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, that's wrong. But if you can almost try to listen underneath the critique or the critical piece that maybe wasn't delivered with great finesse or whatever, that it hit a button, usually somewhere in there deep down there's a little kernel of truth. And so they might be telling you to scrap chapter 2, and that's not right, and that's not what you're going to do, but they've highlighted that there's a little something funky happening. And so you can take that piece and kind of try to filter it. But But yeah, just I think remembering to breathe and to be open to the feedback and to process it, later and throw out, whatever you don't agree with, you can throw out.
Yep. You are the ultimate, gatekeeper on your book, nobody else. So if it doesn't feel right to you, if it really truly doesn't feel right to you, then you don't need to do anything with it. But if there's something in there that does like, I see a little bit what she's talking about, I'm going to spend some more time here and think about that. Or this, I've seen this happen quite frequently. If someone makes a comment to give some feedback on something, and it's not necessarily like a perfect fit, but it sparks something else. It sparks another understanding that you have about what you're writing and enables you to go to the next level, even if it wasn't exactly related to what they were saying. But it helped you to see something different just because of that one little comment.
It's so true. Like they may have just sort of shined that light into a corner that you're like, oh, that now I can go over here. And so getting that feedback can kind of help you in ways that you may not even realize.
And I think that right there is, so now we're making a little bit of a jump to, we've been talking mostly about like individual, like you're helping me, you're giving me feedback, this helps my writing, that kind of thing. But when you are in a writer's workshop where you are giving feedback to multiple people and you are receiving feedback from multiple people, let's say, your work is on the table today, Danielle, and you have 4 people who are giving you feedback in this like group setting. I'm listening. I of course know what my feedback is to you, but then I'm also watching, hearing, absorbing what the other people are saying to you. And I've seen this happen so many times for myself and others that even though my work isn't on the table, me witnessing other people give you feedback helps my work, because then I'm thinking in a different way about certain aspects of my book. Okay, I really want to make sure that when if I'm doing some dialogue, or if I'm doing a story, or if I'm doing this, I don't want it to be predictable. I don't want it to feel stilted. I want to make sure that I am giving the reader something unexpected. Even if you're doing something, even if you're creating a nonfiction book, which is mostly what I deal with, there's still that level of wanting to not be predictable in your writing, because if you're predictable, why read the book? You're not going to you're not going to be sharing anything new. So really, when you hear other people giving feedback to someone else on their writing, you might not understand at first how that would help your writing, but it absolutely does.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, 100%. Like
I think, we talked before, just about like how, I might get feedback on A, but then it made me think about B, C, D, and E, and I've kind of gone off in this direction. And so, there's even those popcorn corollaries that might come up for you as you're, listening to another writer give critique, or you're giving them critique. Again, you might notice strengths or, areas for improvement that you're like, oh, that totally applies to my book too. Or, man, I never thought about using, like we talk about having like different features or kind of like sidebar elements coming in as a thread through my book. So we might be talking with Karen about that on her book, and you're sitting there going, I really love that. Like, how could I maybe incorporate something like that into my book? And it's not going to be exactly like Karen's, but it sparked this idea of a possibility that, you may not have been exposed to if you were kind of in your little writing cave by yourself, or even working one-on-one with a coach, because you're not seeing all of these other different options that are out there.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, obviously when you work with an editor or a coach, they're going to bring their experience from multiple books, but it's not quite the same. I mean, that's wonderful. But then having those immediate, like 4 other people in the room right now who are giving you, you know, different things, that's amazing. And it's amazing for the person who is, you know, whose work is being critiqued, but it's also amazing for every single person there. They're being enriched by that experience.
Yeah, and I think especially like in a brainstorming situation too, like how often have you been in a room and it could be a meeting at work or just, you know, working, sitting with a group of friends, and one person starts with like, well, maybe I could do this. And then this person's like, or maybe we could go over here or this. And it just starts to like snowball and layer, and the discussion becomes so rich by having these multiple voices and multiple points of view that like sometimes you can take this little kernel of an idea and make it so big and so exciting so fast, compared to if you were just brainstorming, you know, by yourself or even with just one other person.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I think that, you know, if you are interested in having that kind of experience, that, I mean, that's the reason that we created this program, not only to help people one-on-one, but to help them experience that, the the benefits of having some really amazing, creative, wonderful writers kind of along with you on the journey. Um, so and it's not just for like a month or 2 months. It's, we've created this so it'll be the entire time that you're writing your book, or a large chunk of the time when you're writing your book for 7 months, having that accountability, having that support, having that community, and not just for the book piece, also for the marketing piece, for the platform building piece, because that's super helpful to have people workshopping your ideas with you too, just like you said, Danielle. So if you're listening to this and watching this and it sounds like something you really want to get in on, we're still accepting people into the Writers Workshop. We just have a couple spaces left. And we start in April. The website where you can find out more information is www.writersworkshophd, as in Heather and Danielle.com.
Yeah, and I, like Heather said, you know, if this sounds exciting to you, we would love, you know, for you to reach out and get in touch with us, for us to, you know, get to know you and hear some more about your book and what you're working on. The people who are already in the program are extraordinary. We've started working with them a little bit one-on-one to prepare for the launch in April, and I'm so excited about what each one of them are up to. And we would love for you to be a part of it, because we know we really have taken all of our collective experience and put it into this program and really designed it in a way that we think is really going to shake up the self-publishing landscape. And we want to bring, we're setting a high bar, and we are going to lovingly push you to create the best book that you possibly can. Heather and I are both, you know, we love excellence. And so, I mean, we, you know, in this series, I think sometimes, you know, we've talked a lot about the different struggles and like that it's hard work. And yes, it is, you know, because I think any, anything sort of, well, this is sort of my philosophy, I guess, like anything worth doing, you know, it's done well, and there's revision involved, and there's, you know, a big process. And so we would be delighted to be on the journey with you and help you create a book that you are really, really proud of. So again, you know, if this sounds interesting to you, we'd love for you to join us, writersworkshophd.com. We've got a couple more webinars coming up in this series, and we'd love for you to join us. And all the details for that are on the website as well. So thank you again for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.